Okay, so that Hideous Strength, chapter 2. Now, before we get into the chapter itself, I think this is coincidental to the calendar, which is why it came to mind, and it wouldn't have otherwise. But I think it's a really good and helpful thing to add to the mix in considering this book. If you recall, when we did sort of a broad introduction, we didn't really talk about a preface because we just wanted to kind of get into chapter 1 after I finished talking about the second book of the trilogy. But that this has the subtitle like a fairy tale for adults. And that might seem like an odd thing, like fairy tales are for children. Lewis was really adamant that fairy tales are for all ages. Good stories are for everyone. And we even mentioned that talking about one of the hallmarks of the old cartoons, the Looney Tunes or the Tom and Jerry's from the 40s. Those were shown before all age movies, not just children's stuff. And they can be enjoyed by every age. And that's what they've held up. The real good ones you can watch today and you can see that they're funny and they're well done. They don't look cheap. They don't look too silly or too childish, because good stories well done are good for all ages. That doesn't mean that every story is appropriate at every age or maturity level, but it's to say just because something is for children doesn't mean it should be of low quality. And certain things that are for children can and maybe should be enjoyed by all ages because they're good stories. Lewis himself was a huge proponent of fairy stories, especially stuff that people would dismiss as being children's stories, where he described like there's this weird kind of chart of your life where when you're really young and you like the stories, and then you hit a certain age where you're embarrassed to like the stories, so you pretend like you don't, and then this longer stretch of time where you've kind of forgotten about them, and then you finally get to a certain age where you don't care what other people think, and you rediscover those stories and you're okay with liking them again. So if we cared a little bit less about what other people thought, we would be okay maybe with some of these stories that we loved as children because they're just good stories. So this being called a fairy tale for adults, there is an adult quality to this. There's things that are going to happen. Frankly, some of the tedium of adult stuff would be boring to kids. These first couple of chapters, kids would have that'd be tough sledding because it's already a little maybe dry for us to just hear about, there's meetings and silly little abbreviations and nicknames for people that were very common in academia, but why people use them now. I mean, this all is maybe a little pedantic for us. And as we get deeper into this, some of this will be a little more mature than would be appropriate for a small child. Either they wouldn't understand or it's maybe not time for them yet. But the element of the mundane world being surrounded at all times by things that are greater and deeper than we recognize or see, and having one of the rare glimpses or entrances into this greater world is kind of the hallmark of any fairy story, depending on, regardless of if it's for children or for adults. And that's definitely what is going to happen the deeper we get into this book. It's still going to be relatively mundane. The second chapter, as we get into the third chapter, it's going to start accelerating a little bit. But fairly soon, this thing is going to take off, and we're gonna wind up in places you never would have expected. And so that's my kind of general heads up to everyone engaging within this. But anyway, Lewis was a great appreciator and admirer of the earlier English author and Roman Catholic G.K. Chesterton. There's a lot of overlap between their two styles, but this this was written by G.K. Chesterton in an essay that he did called The Red Angel. And I pulled it up because on our calendar, today is the Feast of St. George. And I posted this on the Facebook page for our Boy Scout troop and our Cub Scout pack, because St. George, the patron saint of England, but also the patron saint of scouting. And this seems particularly appropriate to post for them, but I think it's also appropriate for us. So this is from Chesterton. Fairy tales do not give the child the idea of the evil or the ugly. That is in the child already, because it's in the world already. Fairy tales do not give the child his first idea of bogey. What fairy tales give the child is his first clear idea of the possible defeat of bogey. The baby has known the dragon intimately ever since he had an imagination. What the fairy tale provides for him is a St. George to kill the dragon. Exactly what the fairy tale does is this. It accustoms him for a series of clear pictures to be the idea that these limitless terrors have a limit, that these shapeless enemies have enemies in the nights of God, that there is something in the universe more mystical than darkness and stronger than strong fear. And that's really a part of the power of fairy tales. We know by practical experience, but also by human imagination, that the world can be a scary place. Kids don't have to be told. There are certain fears that children have of being alone, of the dark, of strange noises. You don't have to tell a child to be scared of those things. You don't have to teach them or show them. They simply are. And that seems to be a common part of our humanity. As a matter of fact, it seems unusual when we meet a person, let alone a child, who isn't a little uneasy at stuff like the dark. So when things go bump in the night, our imaginations are ready-made to consider all sorts of awful things it could possibly be. What fairy tales and these stories do is counterbalance our innate, our natural, and our untaught imaginations, which fill us with fear and dread. That the fear and the dread is not greater or bigger or stronger than the goodness of God. We get power from the fairy tales when we learn about the brave knights or the warriors or simply the coming dawn. One of the reasons that the movie Fantasia was considered Walt Disney's biggest failure. He thought this was going to be the next big thing. He thought the plan was that the first movie would be the beginning of a series. And these would come out periodically with new music, with different genres and new art. But the first one, it just didn't go over well. It was, I'm not going to say it was a box office bomb, but it was a big disappointment. And every time it was re-released in the theaters, there were always complaints about the Night on Bald Mountain sequence. And if you've never seen it, or if it's been a long, long time since you've seen, since you have seen Fantasia, Night on Bald Mountain is considered, musically, it's a tone poem. So I believe it's Mussorgsky, but he's basically telling a story through this little symphonic piece. And the music, it sounds very, you know, kind of scary. Dun, 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 dun. You know, lots of stuff like it, and it's describing like the nighttime on a mountaintop, and it's actually these like spiritual malevolent forces, and the music, it grows and it swells, and it's kind of dreadful, and it's kind of unnerving, and in Fantasia you have like this huge spectral demon which is kind of coming out to oversee all of these terrible things happening, and his shadow is sort of consuming this little town and the village, and it looks like darkness is going to overcome and win the day. And then the dawn begins to break, and the musical piece turns on a chime, dong, dong, which in Fantasia and in the initial intention of the music is to represent the church bells that were ringing in a new day. And that even in the throes of darkness, all of our greatest fears are running amok. The dawn still comes, and the day wins. And all these terrible things are banished back into the darkness, into their cracks and crevices, to go hide again, because they cannot confront the day. The church bells win, daybreak wins, God wins. And anyway, it was like so scary that there were always complaints about, oh, we don't want our children to watch Fantasia because that sequence is too creepy. This big demon it's too frightening, and why would you put something in like that for small children, and blah blah blah. But again, we don't have to imagine terrible things in this world. There are terrible things, straight up. Truth is stranger than fiction, and the news can be more frightening than the stuff we imagine. But our imaginations can also come up with some real terrible stuff too. But the world is and can be a very frightening place. Is there a balance? Is there a hope? And the fairy story, like the scriptural story, is to remind us that yes, we remain in the palm of God's hand. And no matter how dark the night gets, dawn is coming. And no matter how overwhelming the demonic forces seem, the church bells will ring and they will flee. The fairy story says the dragon may be fearsome and may be threatening your destruction, but the knight in shining armor will stand for you and defend you and protect you. So this book is not going to talk about dragons or things that go bump in the night. We're going to get, though, a lot of adult fears and concerns. We're not so concerned about things that go bump in the night as though we're aware of it. The things that go bump in the night still worry us. The things that fill us with dread, though, are usually a lot more prosaic. Stuff about our jobs, or our marriages, or our health, or our children, our futures, or just how things are going, how people treat us. We have some hopes and expectations. We've got some desires. Will they be met? Will they be thwarted? Will people be mean to us? Will we lose out? Will we be excluded? It's from the dramatic to the small, but a lot of the concerns that will be raised within this book are going to be the adult version of the fairy tale fears, some of which are going to be, I think, pretty identifiable and pretty understandable. So is there a knight in shining armor equivalent for our adult fears? And this book will say yes. And in some very unexpected ways. By the time we get to the end of it, not by this chapter, but by the time we get to the end of it, we will see that even these fears, the ones that start off fairly simple, but then grow almost out of control to the truly terrifying, that they are boundless as well. They are bounded as well. They are not limitless, just like Chesterton wrote. But they too have enemies in the nights of God, and the church bells are going to ring, and the dawn is going to break, and God is going to win. Even for us grown-ups. Okay, so Chapter 2, some of this is going to take some periodic thinking through or translating because it's kind of jargony. And the jargon is academia, and the jargon is English academia. Now, I have some experience here. I did not attend school in England or anywhere in Great Britain, but my seminary sure tried their best. So I went to the University of South in Swanee, Tennessee, um, and it is a little bitty school on top of a great big mountain. And when it was created in the 1800s, it was intended for a couple of purposes. The first of which was to be a seminary for the training of clergy south of the Mason-Dixon line, so that there was a regional opportunity for people to not have to always go to, say, New York City or whatever, and still have clergy who could serve the church regardless of where you're from. But the second part of it was to have an English style institution of higher learning. And by that, I mean, they did what they could using stone cut from Montego Mountain to build an Oxford or a Cambridge in the middle of the woods. And most of those buildings looked like they could have been airlifted from England and just plopped off in rural Tennessee. So there are academic vestiges that are super English that have been preserved there, that even American institutions that might have done it in the 17 or 1800s stopped doing it a long time ago. For instance, all of the professors wear academic gowns to class. Now this is not true in the seminary, but it is true in the college. So it's a little liberal arts college, and the one graduate program is the seminary. So it is technically a university, but the undergraduates, the professors wear the black academic gowns to class. And that when you get far enough, if your grades are okay, you get inducted into the Order of the Gownsmen, and you wear an academic gown to class. A lot of the teaching style is modeled on that sort of, I don't know if you really call it Socratic or not, but this kind of Oxford Don small group where the professor is more of a discussion facilitator. Like, you're expected to have your stuff together. You're expected to know the material because you're going to be asked questions and you're going to be able to participate. And it's not necessarily in a big lecture hall. It might just be with 10 or 12 people sitting around a table in a room having a discussion. And if you haven't read your stuff, there's nowhere to hide. So little things like that, little traditional elements, little affectations. So Swanee was pretty dang English in that regard. And so a lot of this stuff, just think Harry Potter. If you can have Hogwarts and Harry Potter in mind, then a lot of this is going to make more sense. So the fact that they are constantly giving each other nicknames or abbreviations is just a super English way, especially in academia, NO, non-OLET, and it's this kind of circuitous, lengthy, not particularly funny inside joke to give someone a nickname of a weird abbreviation. There's going to be a lot of that because that's just what they do. It amuses them to give people obscure inside joke nicknames. And maybe you've been around that with a certain circle of friends or in a certain environment or whatever, but that's kind of what we're seeing here. But I had mentioned this early on, and this chapter is a huge reminder, at least from Mark's point of view, the great temptation and desire of being in the in crowd. I think to a large degree that is a universal human temptation, to be on the inside rather than on the outside of the group. We want to feel included rather than excluded. And whenever anybody says, no, 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 come here, let me whisper something in your ear, we feel a little thrill, a little sense of pride, maybe, or just a little sense of achievement. But when we see, like if we're in some kind of function or some kind of event, and you see the organizer of the event call certain people forward and talk to them and not you, you're like, huh, I wonder what they're talking about. Oh, well. But if you get called, oh, they called me. There's this little sense of, oh, all right, all right. And then you go up and you feel a little sense of something. Mark is kind of petty and immature. But the fact that he is petty and immature maybe just magnifies a temptation that I think we all feel, and a disappointment that we all feel. We want to feel acknowledged. We want to feel invited. We want to feel recognized. We like it. It feels nice. And when the opposite happens, we feel a little sad or a little down or a little alone. And our temptations can be used by others. There is a saying that there are two things that con men rely on. And if you don't do these two things, you aren't worth the trouble of trying to con. Number one is they look for trustworthy people, like people who are trusting. So one way to protect yourself from con men is just be skeptical of everybody. That's not very nice, and we don't want to do that. And the idea is, you want to be thinking the best of people. So that might be one you don't want to get rid of. But the other one is willing to get something for nothing. And that one is maybe the most common. A con man will have some element of something for nothing woven within their approach. It's often hidden. It's not, I'm going to give you something for nothing. Like, that's a little too obvious. But ultimately, there's some moment within their story, within their presentation, within their hook, where you are faced with the opportunity of getting something for nothing. And if you go after it, well, that's when they get you. So our temptations, our weaknesses, whether they're the ones common to humanity or the ones that are either unique to us or ones that, while they might be common, are kind of our particular buttons that can be pressed, can be used by other people. This has a lot of manipulation going on. This first section where we have these long conversations, especially with Feverstone and Mark, we saw at the end of the last chapter that Feverstone, when he took over that academic meeting about whether or not to sell the woods to NICE, this incoming institution, that he was not playing fair, but he would argue one thing just to kind of get people moving, and then kind of nudge them to what what he wanted them to think and wanted them to decide. And he basically played the room. Well, he's playing Mark right here. And if you watch what he says and kind of get a sense for how he's saying it, there is an appeal, and you can see Mark respond every time it comes up, where we get some of his feelings and some of his thoughts, like, oh, and Mark's really starting to feel like he's right on the edge of becoming an insider. He's being brought into Feverstone's confidence, and they start talking down towards the people who aren't there. What a risk and a temptation that is. That's also very common to humanity, and that is one of the nice working definitions of character that I've used in the past. This is from other people, but what do you do when you think no one else is watching. That's your character. It's one thing to act in a certain way when everyone's around, but when you think nobody is watching, do you cheat? Do you steal? Do you lie? Do you whatever? So, what do you say to someone to their face, and what do you say behind their backs? And Mark is being given the opportunity to basically talk behind the backs of the people he was just in a group with. And Feverstone is giving him every opportunity to kind of see what he's going to do. And Mark swallows the bait completely. And we can look on this end and say, Mark, what a dummy. What, he's insecure or whatever. But again, a con man isn't coming up to you to say, would you like something for nothing? I would like to con you. They're wrapping it in something that sounds very plausible, something that sounds very non-threatening, something that sounds very positive. The successful cons are things that sound not just good for you, but good in general. Kind of get your defenses down. But this idea of every opportunity, Mark is taking one more step into kind of a negative direction. And once he finds out, when he tells a joke at the expense of somebody who's not there, that Feverstone laughs, what do you think he's going to do next time? He's going to tell another joke about somebody else, and then somebody else, and then somebody else. And that maybe you've seen this. Maybe you have seen your own behavior be a little less noble under certain circumstances or with certain people. When you're in a certain group, do you complain a little more? When you're in a certain group, do you grouse about other people or talk about other people or just do things that you wouldn't maybe do otherwise, but they can kind of, you kind of go along to get along. But then you find yourself starting to do and maybe be someone that you might not have been otherwise. Some of the worst temptations where we can really lose ourselves are very small, but repeated. These little conversations don't seem like much. But for each one of them, Mark is being nudged to do something a little unsavory or rude. These aren't even really terrible at this point. But he is absolutely saying stuff he wouldn't say to somebody's face. He is absolutely acting in a way that if the whole group was there, or maybe if his wife was there, or his mother was there, he wouldn't. And those steps, which is kind of the scary thing about sin and temptation, they can add up. I think it was in this class, but it might have been during one of our sermon discussion times at a Wednesday Eucharist. But the talking about the TV series Breaking Bad, and that the title of the show comes from I think it's like a Cajun description from people in Louisiana, that when you break bad, you're basically making a choice towards the dark side. And that the creator of the show said he was going to kind of envision a cross between Mr. Chips and Scarface. So what would cause an otherwise mild-mannered, everyday guy, as a matter of fact, somebody who's a little bit put upon? Because in the beginning of that series, he's a high school science teacher who is not respected by his students. He's not particularly respected at home. He's kind of struggling on his bills. And he's just kind of a milquetoast sort of kind of guy who then gets a cancer diagnosis. I mean, it's just like everything's sort of going wrong for him, but he's also kind of a pushover. But by the end of the show, he's like this drug kingpin who is coordinating murders and all this terrible stuff. How do you get there? It's rarely a singular day or a singular decision. It's more often when you break bad, it's like you take the wrong turn and you keep going. And every step takes you a little closer in the wrong direction. So Mr. Chips the teacher, becomes Scarface, the mobster, not overnight, but in a successive series of small decisions that lead you further and further and further away. Within the church, the concept of Jesus as the good shepherd who goes to find the lost sheep, willing to leave the 99 in order to find the one and bring it back. Our ability to get lost is rarely an instantaneous thing. When we wander away, it's usually small steps and another step and another step. So small that individually we don't pay much attention because it's not that big of a deal. We're rarely faced with some catastrophic moral choice and said, yes, I choose evil. Instead, when we've hit really low points in our life, isn't it more likely we're going to think, how in the world did I get here? How did this happen? When did this happen? These little steps keep adding up, and suddenly you have found yourself in very, very deep water, and there's no sight of land. How did I get so far? These little steps add up. So this is kind of what we're starting to watch. Mark's on the road to Breaking Bad. And it's starting off with some very small, very petty things. Laughing at a colleague, making fun of somebody who's not in the room, getting your ego stroked by someone who is your superior, and starting to think, well, what can I do or say that's going to get more good reactions from him? Because once he gave me one compliment, I really liked that a lot. What would make him give me more compliments? I'll do that too. And we're starting to get a little bit of an explanation of what nice is. Not much, which is part of the problem. They're very eager for this sale to happen, and they're all very confident, almost cocksure about the importance of nice. But just ask one of them, well, what does it actually do? And all you're left with are these super vague generalities of jargony nonsense words. Ultimately, they're talking about the practical application of science. And everyone seems to agree that that is kind of at the heart of this institute, taking a variety of scientific disciplines and applying a particular rigorous method in order to come up with society-wide direct applications. We're going to run the world under scientific principles. And a part of that might sound very, okay, because what is science if not learning? You experiment and you find truth or accuracy or what works. And if you experiment and it doesn't work, well, then you change your hypothesis and then you experiment and you find something that is successful. Why wouldn't you want to apply the knowledge of your success so that people aren't constantly inventing the wheel every single time? We don't want to reinvent the wheel every single time. We don't want to build our own cars. We don't want to manufacture our own computers. We don't want a lot of the benefits that we have from, say, daily technology that we would be personally responsible for. We want to benefit from the fact that people have thought through these things, they've worked on these things, they've improved these things. I was just telling somebody yesterday, I watched this super fascinating YouTube documentary about street signs, which sounds as boring as it could possibly be. But it was actually super interesting. It was covering basically 100 years of the technology changes in street signs. Now, when you think about a street sign, whatever, but you need to be able to see that street sign like a stop sign in the daytime and at night. How do you see it at night? That is a problem that has had to be solved over generations. So before there was electricity everywhere, how are you going to make a sign visible at night? And it was kind of hard to do. And they went through a variety of ways to try to make that happen. But even once the electricity was available, the signs that we have, you're going to drive here on 540A, and it's going to be 9 o'clock at night, and it's dark, and you're going to get up to the road, and you're going to be able to see where it says Lakeland Highlands. Very brightly, very clearly. It's very clean. How? It's not externally illuminated with built-in lights. Why is it so clear? Why is it so bright? And there's this whole technology behind it where it started off with using reflectors, but then that made it difficult to see because reflectors, by virtue of their shape to reflect the light, they make things very, very bumpy and very textured. And they tried colored beads and shiny different metals and stuff like that. But then you had lights bouncing off all over the place. And they had external illuminations. We're going to put lights over it. And that was not like spinning electricity all the time, where you only needed it when a car was coming. You don't have to have something illuminated at midnight if there's nobody there. But now there's just light everywhere. It's expensive. It's annoying. This whole growth of technology, there's actually a film manufactured that is placed over all of these printed signs that has this extremely complicated, mathematically designed pattern where your headlights are catching it, reflecting off, but only coming back to you. If you stand by these signs at night and somebody drives past and they can see it, it's still dark to you. Have you ever noticed that? It's still dark to you because the light isn't reflecting everywhere. It's angled to reflect back to them. Fascinating. We 100% rely on that. We want a good scientific method to make our lives better and easier and safer and clearer and all that kind of stuff. And we benefit from countless things every single day because of that. We assume that the medication that we took today that our doctor prescribed was correct and manufactured right and pure and labeled correctly and all this kind of stuff. Same thing with our food. We take it for granted that our food was produced in a hygienic fashion with the ingredients it says are there. All these sort of things. So science and benefits of science and blah, blah, blah. The difference between science and scientism. Scientism is a philosophy seeking to answer all of life's questions, when science itself is simply a way of knowing and understanding. Science relies on philosophy and it relies on faith in order to have any application. There's no inherent or fundamental divergence of faith and science, because to some degree they are asking different questions and answering different things. They work together. As a matter of fact, the entire concept of the scientific method grows first from the church. These scientists like Francis Bacon, who develops the scientific churchman, the originator of the cosmological concept of the Big Bang was a Catholic monk. Almost every genetics class taught begins with the principles from Gregor Mendel, who was a monk who made copious notes about the beans plants he was growing. And from that, we get this entire scientific field. The idea is, and that's kind of the scary overreach of something like NICE. They're not going to say, how can we use technology to make our street signs better? How can we use principles of science to control your life? The choices that you wouldn't think aren't necessarily a scientific question at all. because they're not. Science can tell us what and how. Science is neither designed nor capable of answering why. That is the realm of philosophy and theology. That's why they're all needed together. Science can observe something, can measure something, can experiment with something. We understand a lot, for instance, about, or at least we believe we do, about the physical origins of the universe. There's all sorts of theories with a lot of mathematical foundations about how the universe or the world began or whatever. Science is utterly incapable because it's not asking the question science is designed to answer, why there is a universe at all. Why? Why do we exist? Science has no answer for that because it's not a scientific question. That is a philosophical question. That is a theological question. And science, when you start pushing it into areas that it is not designed, we can hook you up to EEGs, and we can put you in an MRI machine, and we can show you pictures of friends and family members and your dog and stuff like that. And we can describe the various biochemical reactions that are happening when you see their pictures. But science cannot explain love. Why? It can't encapsulate these deeper truths that are not measurable. The mother feeds her child. The mother cares for her child. The mother bathes and clothes her child. Is it because she loves the child, or is she fattening up the child to eat him later? Well, that sounds crazy and stupid. But externally, what would be the difference? You would observe the same things. The Hansel and Gretel story with the witch fattening up Hansel to eat him later. She fed him. She bathed him. She kept him clean, kept him safe. Why? Because she wanted to eat him. A mother might do that, but nobody assumes she wants to eat the baby. That's love. It is the mother who loves that child, wants that child to grow and to thrive, and starts thinking about that child growing up one day, starts thinking about grandchildren, all these sorts of things. Science has zero answer for that. And our scientific observations can record what we see and can make some suppositions, but is really not designed and is incapable of going deeper than that. What NICE wants to do, and what's being presented now, and this is where Mark's getting hooked in, we want to run society scientifically to be more efficient and better. They start talking quietly near the end. What are the sort of things he's mentioning? Like eugenics. We need to get rid of the undesirables. Certain races shouldn't reproduce. Certain people shouldn't reproduce. Well, as a matter of fact, we need to couple the bright and the smart and the compliant with another bright, smart, and compliant, so they will produce and we can manage that. And then once they do start having children, we need to get them right away so those children can be educated to think the right things. This is now taking science and saying the entire human experience can be boiled down to ones and zeros. And we can make a better person, a more efficient person, by controlling every aspect of their life because we know better. We are the scientific experts. And that is what NICE apparently is hoping to do. And they want Mark, as a sociologist, as one who studies human society, help us explain what we're doing in a way that makes it palatable to your average, everyday normie. Because they're not as smart as we are. They're not as educated as we are. They're going to hear some of these words like eugenics, and they're going to be afraid that we're going to start sterilizing them. I mean, we are, but how can we explain it to them in a way that they will understand? What's the right words to use so they won't be alarmed, they won't be angry, they'll go along because ultimately it's for their own good. And how do we know it's for their own good? Because we know what's best. our educated scientific method has informed us about what is best for them. Help us sell it. Maybe write some articles, maybe go to some meetings, spin it. Explain it in such a way where people will start agreeing, oh, you're right, we do need these things. I benefit from technology and the advance of science in my life. Why wouldn't I benefit from technology and science to show me how to live right? Now that you've explained it that way, oh, it makes perfect sense. Here is the fairy tale fear just now starting to raise up its head. This is the sort of stuff where I said back in 2020, it was a little not the right time. When we have a government saying who is an essential worker and who is not, who can be out on the road and who can't, which businesses can be open because they're essential and which ones can't. You know, the sort of governmental decrees that we've never seen in our lifetimes. It just didn't seem like the right time to start talking about this. Now, that is not to say that this isn't a continual debate. You know, we can always say, what is the proper role? And, you know, when are we being irresponsible? When are we being responsible? And so on and so forth. But in the middle of a lockdown, in the middle of, you know, a worldwide pandemic, and suddenly like everything is up for grabs and everything is changing very, very fast. And there's a lot of pressure. You know, you got to do this or else. With a little more space and a little more time. And even people who are very strongly on the side of that, I think almost everyone has come around to the position of, yeah, that was probably too much. That was probably more than was necessary. And to some degree, you can say it was more than was necessary, but better safe than sorry. But I think we're all kind of roughly, for the most part, like, yeah, it was maybe more than was needed. You know, I'm assuming you all remember we were getting changing information on a monthly basis. Wear masks, don't wear masks. 6 feet apart, not 6 feet apart. It's spread like this, it's not spread like this. This is the person who's vulnerable, this is not the person who's vulnerable. This is who needs to be vaccinated, this is who doesn't need to be vaccinated. I mean, it's like stuff is changing all the time. Now, the scientific process says that's okay, stuff is going to change all the time. The more we experiment on something, we ought to expect to be wrong and change. Like, it's good because now you've learned something and you can adjust. But we were told multiple times, nope, that's it, the end, it has to be this way, only for that to change in a month's time, saying, nope, that's it, the end, it was different. So there seemed to be very little humility of, hang on, everybody, we're doing our best. And when we get new information, we'll tell you, and it might change, but please, let's work together. Instead, it really kind of came across as, you have to do this or else, and we know this is right. And then it would change. Like, wait a second, you just said, I just did that other thing, and you said that was right. Well, again, scientism says whatever we have experientially, developed as of right now is the truth with a capital T, and you must do this or else. The scientific method says this is where we are as of now, and this is our best advice, or these are our recommendations, these are the highest probabilities. And you can make policy off of that to say, our policy says we ought to do these things because this is our best evidence. But when policy and science started intermixing in some really strange ways, we were left with a lot of kind of controlling manipulative behavior that was described as science, but it really wasn't. So, are you denying science? No, I love science. I'm the guy who does science every year with our VBS kids because I get to blow stuff up and I show them cool things. But it's a tool. And it's not the only one we have, but it's not the only one we ought to use. And we need to know when to use the right tool at the right time. We use a hammer when we're building and constructing things. Would we use a hammer to make dinner? Maybe. You ever tenderized meat? You could use a hammer to do that. There could be a purpose for it, but I wouldn't use that same hammer that I was using to tenderize meat to stir the soup. Theoretically, it could work, but that's not a very useful tool for that particular function. And I definitely wouldn't use it to bake bread because hammers don't bake bread. You got to use a different tool for that. So anyway, we've got a couple of things happening. Mark is starting to take very slow but steady steps in the wrong direction based off of his temptations. They're kind of petty. They're kind of self-centered. They're kind of insecure. But, you know, here we go casting stones. Which of us has not felt insecure before? Which of us have not changed a little bit of what we say or how we acted to fit into a group? Now, the first couple of points about nice has started to come up. And even the guys who said they knew what it was, in private, Feverstone is laughing at them to Mark, saying they really have no idea. Of course, we let these other people talk because you need the upfront people to make the presentations to other people. But us behind the scenes who are doing the real work, we know better. And so he's actually set up this meeting with the guy who's really in charge, Wither. Now, Mark has assumed, like everybody else, that the public face of Nice, this guy Jules, is the real head of the thing. He's like, nah, he's like the celebrity endorser. He's the YouTube influencer we've hired to put a friendly face. But the real decision makers, that's the guy I would like you to meet. The people on the outside have no idea who he is, or if they ever met him, they wouldn't even realize who they're talking to. But he's going to make this arrangement for Mark to meet the real shot caller of Nice. And that's what's being set up. And he's basically arriving as the chapter ends. The chapter begins to interweave then two different trips, two different directions, and two different people. And Mark is arriving at the home of Wither, just as Jane is arriving at St. Anne's. Now, to backtrack a little bit, we've interspersed, and this book is going to do that. We've got two protagonists in this, not just one, Mark and Jane. And so far, we're dealing with one or the other. Mark's story and Jane's story. We had a little bit of crossover when Mark finally came home. And what did he find when he came home? How was Jane? She was just a mess. So if you recall from that last chapter, when she had met with the Dembles, something had happened. She felt a sense of safety that she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt that sense of like the motherly love that she was craving without really realizing it. I will say, I think I mentioned this last week. We're talking about like early marriage. Like one of the weird things for me was Lula was always around. Oh, there she is again. I think there's also something in early marriage, especially when you marry young, and maybe if you marry older, it's less of a big deal. But you kind of have these moments where you want to be back in your childhood home. You want to be back in your room. You want to be back with your parents or whatever. There's something about like, ooh, I'm kind of like a real grown-up now. And maybe sometimes I don't want to be. Maybe sometimes I really wish my mom was making me a peanut butter and jelly sandwich and putting me to bed instead of having all the burdens of life on my own shoulders. And that's kind of what hits Jane, maybe. And then she starts blurting out about these dreams of the strange man coming out of the ground speaking something that sounds like Spanish, of the disembodied head that turns out to look like a guy she's now seen in a news story of a convicted criminal who was executed. So this has all alarmed her, and she's all out of sorts. Mark comes home, and she just kind of collapses in his arms and blubbers and boo-hoos and all this kind of stuff. And she sort of hates that about it. She doesn't want to feel this way. So C.S. Lewis is not a woman. I am not a woman. I cannot answer for these feelings. But I'm wondering if he is describing a real sensation where now I can tell you from a guy's point of view, there are times where we feel very vulnerable. And there are times where we feel very insecure or even immature or young or whatever. And you kind of want somebody to take care of you or somebody to say it's okay or some trustworthy, strong, reliable person to kind of give us a deep hug and say, I got this. So, I mean, I'm part of that, I think, is common humanity, but Jane is also sort of expressing kind of a frustration at that. Like, I don't want to be weak. I don't want to feel dependent. I don't like that I've kind of broken down as though I'm a quote unquote hysterical woman. That there's maybe this conflicting sense of I want to be real and vulnerable, but at the same time, I don't. That I feel is probably common to all humanity. But ladies, you will just have to tell me if you can identify with anything that she's saying. And so she just wants Mark to be strong and solid for a minute. She wants Mark to protect her for a minute, to say it's going to be okay. And they, very obviously spend the night together. And there are few moments in this world that are more intimate than that. Maybe none, I would assume, thinking, now that I say it out loud. And to be that vulnerable and that close to someone in a simultaneous fashion, there is also a deep sense of acceptance, which maybe in a time of great alarm or fear, feeling truly accepted in your vulnerability in an intimate fashion. But even that she's kind of frustrated with, because at the end she's like, well, he's just still going to leave the next day. And he does. Oh, I've got this other meeting. I've got to do this thing. But she's also been given a task now. Mother Dimble has said, I've got somebody you can talk to. So she wants her to talk to, what's the woman's name? I think I've forgotten it. But she lives in St. Anne's. It's kind of the, like the next village over, basically. And the closer she gets to St. Anne's and she starts, she rides the train and she's seeing a lot of the just everyday people. And Jane is kind of, she's educated, she's working on a doctorate, she's a young woman married to another academic. Maybe being around people who are just like commuting feels a little awkward to her, but she is kind of faced with regular folks. And it's a little alarming. She's kind of getting outside of her comfort zone. She's going into St. Mary's, or St. Anne's rather. And it's a place that just kind of feels out in the country, and a place that kind of feels very different than where she was. And she's getting all these sort of second thoughts and doubts. And what am I actually doing here? And this is weird. And I feel kind of worried and what's going to happen. And so we now have Mark and Jane headed off in opposite directions, both with some anxiety, but maybe for different reasons. Mark's anxiety is, I really, really want to be on the end. I hope I don't screw it up. Jane seems more like, I don't know if what I'm doing is right or not. Like this, am I making too much out of this? Are people going to make fun of me? Maybe I shouldn't even bother. Maybe I should just get my stuff together. And both of them are now arriving in their destinations. What will they find? And what will be the next step? Mark, if he's been breaking bad, that means little steps along the way going in the wrong direction. What kind of steps is Jane taking? And where do you think that might lead her? So, any questions about two? Any words that popped up, or phrases, or moments, or I didn't understand that scene? All right, so we'll do we're okay with doing a chapter at a time. It's a decent little chunk.
So far,
It's a decent little chunk, but I think it's, you know, I don't think 2 chapters, that might be too much. That's kind of long. So in the same way that Mark is taking small steps, leading him in a bad direction, I keep kind of warning you that this book is going places you're not expecting. It's going to be small steps. And I'm not saying that at any moment there's like a switch will flip, but little by little, stuff is going to start happening. So be on the watch, be on the lookout, because there's going to come a moment and you're going to say, how did we get here? And it's been there all along. We're going little bits at a time, for good or for bad. Maybe for good and bad. How about that? So chapter 3, we're going to get some more steps along the way. I don't think we're going to get super dramatic moments in chapter 3, but some are coming sooner rather than later. All right. Okay. Thank you very much.